Hi, I'm Sean Charles Baker, and I'm here to tell you about my new book, Murder Virus, which is up for pre-order at barnesandnoble.com and Amazon, anywhere that you order books. There's a pandemic of violence flooding the streets of major cities all around the world, and as cases of the media dubbed murder virus, MV20, soar, everyone infected goes on a nonstop killing spree. Caught in the middle of all this in downtown Seattle is police detective Angela Miller, and her only trustworthy ally is the self-proclaimed psychic detective Gerald Henry. So as these two try to navigate the violence, they are drawn into New Age guru Abramelin Harvest's plot to heal the planet. Harvest's missive: the world is sick and humanity is the infection. The cure? You guessed it, murder. Up for pre-order, barnesandnoble.com, Amazon, anywhere that gets books can get it for you.
A most horrible library.
Hello, I'm Sean Charles Baker. Welcome back to A Most Horrible Library. This is the second part of our two-part Kelley Jones discussion. So in this part, we move beyond Bernie Wrightson and into all kinds of great stuff, from the origins of Kelley's career in comics, his MO for working, his philosophies, movies he loves, art that he loves. Everything's here. So enjoy.
Go, man, I hope I get that moment. I hope I get a sequence. I remember I felt I had touched upon it briefly, got that feeling he must have had when I was doing Dead Man. When he asked me about why I thought he would be sad when Frankenstein would be released, I said, because I felt sad when Dead Man was going to be released, because it was just me drawing this alone for a year. I every 3 months I would send whatever I had to let the editor see. It was a book nobody cared about. And I told him this. I said, like, you're doing Frankenstein for yourself. There's no publisher. There's no one winning. I was on a book that they said, basically, Kelley, it's not that we think you're great. We don't even know you that all. We just have to publish it to keep the copyright, because that was the rules then. Mm-hmm. You have to put something out physically. Music's like that. That's why they'll do 300 CDs or something. It doesn't have to be enough. Just, okay, now we keep our copyright for however much longer. Mm-hmm. Well, it's the same with that. Who cares about Deb? Unless Neil Adams is doing it, who cares? And I understood that. I totally agreed. So there's a beauty that comes in that, where you're left alone. And for that year, I was left alone. And I got to just live in that world, live in that artwork, live in that story. It was just me and this. And there was this kind of sadness when it came out. Now it's everybody else's. Now people can, because it is theirs. It's now everybody's. That's the way it works. Casablanca is our movie. It isn't Michael Curtiz and Humphrey Bogart's, though they made it. It's our movie, and that's the way this works. So when I told him that, I said, it isn't me analyzing you. It's I went through this. Spent a long time on something, and there was just this melancholy that now it's gone. That lonely thing you have is kind of cool. That he agreed with. Yeah, that he understood that. And so at that point, I think maybe that's where I felt a connection beyond anything else, was that there was one other guy that I would say this to, and he would go, yeah, I get it. Most artists, they can't wait to get it out there and reaction and praise and whatnot. And that's fine. That's fair. They're competitive. Bernie just wanted to live in that world. And that is why the strength of that stuff stayed so pure, not tied to a time, not time, his work was, well, you're alone when you do it. You're alone in a room. You're alone for long periods of time. We read these things alone. Nobody's around. It's a very lonely thing. He knew that once he released it, he knew he could look at it and say, yeah, this is superior stuff, whatever he was doing. But for that great moment, you're the only guy. And never did, I remember there was a thing where John Byrne, at the height of his powers, he was doing the X-Men, had stood up at a convention, and I think it's it had been documented, where he had said, quick, name someone better than me. I can't think of anyone better than me. And without missing a beat, someone in the audience said, Bernie Wrightson. He goes, yeah, Bernie Wrightson. Yeah, that guy's better than me. And I went, yeah, that's it. That's my go-to guy. I mean, Bernie Wrightson, other artists quake in fear at thinking they would have to do something like that. You wouldn't even know where to begin. I don't care how long you've done it. You wouldn't even know where to begin. And then add to it, this guy's 29 when he did it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crisy.
It is crazy.
He did it for himself,
and for himself, not knowing what was going to happen.
Right. And didn't I read with Dead Man, you did a similar thing where you did the whole emaciated redesign and expected them to be like, yeah, you're fired. This isn't what we wanted.
And fairly so. I couldn't compete with Neil Adams. And that first day drawing it, I couldn't compete with him. And at that point I realized, okay, they didn't know I loved horror. They just assigned it to me. I just started out at DC. I think they wanted me more to be an inker, which is fine. And I was thinking, yeah, maybe I'll just do that. I didn't know if I still wanted to do comics anymore because I couldn't find the stories. And for me, I needed that. I needed that whole thing. And so when that happened, that first day I drew the page, and the next morning I got up and looked at it, and it was dreadful. It was just dreadful. I could see fear in it, and not the good kind. And I could just think, all this is going to do is make them want Neil Adams again. So I sat there, and it was about an hour or so later. I know I had to get it done because I accepted the job and they were waiting for it, and it was a tight deadline. And it just hit me. Take it literally. Just take it literally. And I thought of Swamp Thing. He looks like a swamp walking around.
Yeah.
And so it's dead. And Wrightson asked me that question. How did you come up with that? Because that seems like an obvious thing. And I said, years of reading your stuff. And it isn't how you drew, but how you would think. And I said, I had to get out from under the shadow of Neil Adams. And he goes, yeah, that's a tough one. Because you're just going to be compared to it. So you do something so different that no one's going to think of Neil Adams.
Right.
Good or bad, they're not going to think about it. They're going to look at you and take you as you are, because the idea is much stronger than the technical ability I possessed. The rest of it was the atmosphere. And I did learn that from Wrightson, that he would build to a moment. He would care for those panels that other artists would just be bored by. He cared for them and developed them and made them perfect, not overthinking them till you got to the moment. And so I took that for Dead Man, and it got great quick. I mean, the emotion for me, the experience became great. All of a sudden it all worked. All of a sudden it wasn't a difficult how to do this now. It was just the pleasure of every day sitting down and seeing what would happen, rather than being afraid what would happen. And that's all due to years of reading his work and having that still be, as time went on, because I was a tremendous fan of John Byrne and a tremendous fan of Neil Adams, tremendous fan of Marshall Rogers, all these really, Michael Golden, John Buscema, Wally Wood, all these guys were just tremendous, but it would always come back to Bernie as, that still was a perfect pitch. It was still that song you never got tired of. That movie you could rewatch God knows how many times.
Yeah.
He was of his own. I always told Wrightson, I said, if Swamp Thing were coming out now, it would be it is just as big. No one would say it looks of its time. No one would say anything, because it's coming from some personal place. And I was like, where I've always felt if I did that, it was because Dead Man could come out now and be like that. Batman from that period could come out now and be like that, because it came from a personal place rather than what is everyone else doing? What does this editor want? What is the publisher looking for? What is the, people at Wizard Magazine or Comics, any of these Comics Journal, what are they looking at? It was for yourself. You sink or swim on that. You live or die by that. It's fine. If you're doing something you believe in like that, and nobody likes it, and you, whatever, this is what I was thinking, fine, I'll have a book that I would go, this is what I thought. And I kept always thinking, that's what Wrightson would do. This is what I thought, because he did it with Frankenstein. He did it with his Warren work. I mean, he walked away to do these things in black and white that he believed in. He would do this continuously, kind of go to this purity. And if that's not an artist, I don't know what is.
Amen.
And that's it. And I thought, okay, bottom line is, if you're going to be an artist, you be an artist. Careers are very short. And people who last any length of time in comics, it's remarkable. So if you can last, the only thing I can see is it's got to be something personal. And here we are 4 years after his death, talking about him like he just released something.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And it'll always be like that.
It will always be like that. And I will get to, I will always be as sad as I was when he died. And I am so glad I lived in a time where I went to the stands and there was a new Wrightson thing. I started buying Swamp Thing with issue 3, 4, 5 after, I made a point to mow the lawn. I made a point not to get in trouble. I made a point to behave in school and not, so I could go buy these comic books. And I still have my original one. I never went and bought new. The only thing I had to go back and buy was the first issue and the first appearance in House of Secrets. And that was back then.
Yeah.
It was hard to find those things. There weren't stores. You had to go to flea markets, or you had to write in the back of a comic book to some dealer or something. But I found them. And then at that point, a few years later, when stores started happening, I just said, anything by Bernie, let me know. And I remember when A Look Back came out, especially there was the poster series. And I'm so grateful I got those original posters. Because they only did 100. They did them on regular paper, but then they put them on a fine stock, beautifully redone, beautifully presented. But they said, okay, this is expensive. It's going to be $60. And I was, kid. It's hard. Do you, before we order it, you make sure you want one. And I very wisely said, 2. I want 2. Because there's one I'm going to put in my bookcase, and one that is going to be beaten to death. And this is my beat up.
Oh, wow.
Has survived all these years. I know there's collectors out there screaming, but it's beautiful. It's battered and worn from move to move. Bookcase to bookcase, reading it 1,000 times a year practically. I have a perfect edition, never been opened, still in its thing, signed ever. It's in the bookcase.
Awesome.
Which will be beaten and destroyed if this one ever, he'll go right to that. Because this is the old grimoire.
Yeah.
This is it. This is the textbook. This is the Bible. This is the Necronomicon. It's whatever you want to call it. But this wonderful old battered book, it's going to be buried with me, so I have no excuses and no apologies for the condition of this book, because it has been with me, the way Wrightson's been in my mind. It's splattered, it's torn, it's
loved. It looks
loved. It's adored. And it's not because I didn't care. It's because I did care.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why young teenage Kelley, I always love him because he said buy 2. And I gave him $120. I think I got my friend's employee discount, so $110 or whatever, $105. Came home with them, stuck one in the bookcase. It's in perfect condition. So for all the people that freak out, there's one there. And then this one, which is my most loved book ever. You know,
Wow.
That's awesome.
And it is that thing that like that issue 2 of Swamp Thing. I have this thing. This is actually the book that I went in and showed that teacher, showed that art professor. So that kind of power can only come from a guy who knew exactly in his heart what he wanted to put on paper. He wasn't doing it for me.
Mm-hmm.
He did it for himself, and it affected us all this way. He affected horror.
Yeah.
He affected other media, other genres, other everything. I mean, you could use his name as an adjective, Wrightson.
Yeah.
I want it Wrightson. I want it like Wrightson. And everyone knows what you're talking about. If he were here now, he would be red as a beet and saying, shut up. But he knows, as I always told him, I said, no, this is that it's true of any great artist, right? He never failed at finishing that 5%, finish strong. He finished strong. And that's why we can go back and reread any of these things and just and you get transported. Look, I do this. So you do see the nuts and bolts.
Mm-hmm.
It goes away. And if I do look at it, he's the only other guy I can kind of think of is Frazetta. And you just go, there's a gift here beyond just their abilities, that there's something else there that if they had been anything else, they would have this skill. If they were a mechanic, they could do it. They could design the greatest cars. It doesn't matter what it is. No matter what they did, it would be genius because they would put this heart into it. It's the men from the boys. And that's why there's so few. They didn't, I always told him that the thing I really liked was his composition. It's just always the perfect angle. It's always the perfect thing. And he said, that's something you work on. It's, you think about it, because he says, he had told me, you want to have a good time while you're drawing it too. You don't want to think, well, this is awkward, or this is, he just found the right angle, the right light. He did it every time. And that's the amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Every time every time I look at any of his, no matter what and what period, what time, perfect, just perfect. So I always have his stuff up and around because it makes you keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
That there is such this power.
Yeah.
It probably burnt him out, to be the vessel of that kind of creative power. Physically,
very likely.
Physically, I can't see how it wouldn't. It is. From me looking at it, I go, and I put a lot of effort in what I do. I look at what he does and I go, Jesus, that he could not get bored of what he was doing, that he could not get physically worn out and maintain that level of concentration all the way to the end. That he did 10 issues of Swamp Thing is amazing. You'd think maybe do 3 and quit, but he could, and I always used to love that he would say, well, I didn't do well here, I didn't do well there. And I'd look at it and I said, well, I don't want to fanboy him, but those are my favorite things, or that's something that really stood out to me, or that's just incredible. So I didn't contradict him. If that's what he felt, that's what he felt. But man, I loved it. I love those things that he would go, I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. I didn't find it, I don't say that as just, I love him, therefore he can't make a mistake. It's just, with Wrightson, you saw his development. It's all out there, from his 60s fan stuff to his early DC work to when it just exploded to me in 70. It's just, wow, there's something here.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's not very many artists that do that, where you can see this development. Maybe Barry Smith is one that you can see that. But his early stuff I loved. His any period you want to pick, I can just completely deconstruct it for its genius, or enjoy it for its sheer pleasure, the sheer fun of it. And over the length of his career like that, that's amazing. He can still make you can still look at it, and there's the fear in there. Because he tells stories in all these images, there's genuine horror in that doesn't go away.
There's grace too. There's so much humanity and grace, especially, like, I always think about that Frankenstein Alive as he spent, the last thing that he did, he clearly had such an affinity for the character and for the novel that I feel like he wanted, the way the book ends, where it's him looking out over the kind of tumultuous water, and reflecting that he is alive and anything alive deserves to live. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but I feel like he gave that character the end that he wanted it to have. He brought him to this like peace and this grace. And I just think it's so beautiful, especially because it was the last thing that he did.
Yeah. And I think he thought that. I think, I don't know. I think he felt that. It is very personal. I think he loved Frankenstein because as a child you come to it and it's a incredible fairy tale. But as he got older, he felt like the outsider that the monster was. Mm-hmm. We're in this world. We all can communicate now. We all go to endless conventions. But when he was doing it, that wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. So you have to live in the real world. You have to go to the bank. You have to go to the store. You have to deal with your neighbors. You have to go put gas in the car, blah, blah, blah. So if you go around like this, you're an odd duck. There was no social acceptance of this. So to do it, there's a certain, I'm not saying, it's incredibly brave. No, it's just, you can't let it go. It'd be easier to let it go. He couldn't. So I always felt he identified with the monster. Mm-hmm. And as he got older, that meant more to him. And to start with your earliest drawings of Frankenstein, and when you eventually pass, you're still drawing Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. It's got to mean more than just, I like Frankenstein.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I love Frankenstein, but I wouldn't think for a second that I'm wrong on that. I think he just totally identified with it. And I think you're absolutely correct. That last issue, all of that was written by him. It's in the margins of everything he had done. Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful.
I think collectively, my contribution is notwithstanding, I thought it was the best book of the year that I'd seen by anyone because of that power of what he was saying philosophically, which is Mary Shelley. Mm-hmm. And when you think of Frankenstein, to interject yourself, there's Mary Shelley, James Whale, Boris Karloff, and Bernie Wrightson. Yeah. It's them. Yep. And to succeed at that level, I have always felt if we were able to reanimate and bring someone back, Mary Shelley'd give him the biggest smooch on the lips ever for the illustrations.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it is perfect. They're perfect. There's no flaw. There's nothing you look at and go, I like this one better than that one. I go to each one and go, oh, that's just wonderful. Mm-hmm. That's hard to say.
Yeah, I know for me, like when I thumb through the lost pages, and I look at each and every single one, and I just scratch my head, like, why aren't these? I want these in with everything. I want to read the book with these attached because that same thing. They are perfect.
And I know that people being born now will come to this stuff when it's their time, and they're going to think the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be, oh, it looks of its time, or that's their take on it then. It's going to be, this is perfect. I mean, I've seen other people do very fine illustrations or illustrated work, fine artists. They can't touch his hem of his cloak.
Yeah.
As far as this sheer power. And again, it's this thing that came out of him. I can't imagine the amount of physical energy that it took to create those plates.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If he never did anything but that. But you can say that about so many things in his life. The posters he did in the 70s. I'm entranced by them. His comics work. I'm entranced by it. His black and white comics work, if that was all he did. I think for a guy to do only 8 pages in heavy metal and they say that's what we're going to adapt into a film.
Right. Yeah.
Genius.
Yeah.
No, he's worthy of all of our praise and more so. He's worthy of a society, if there were, the Wrightson Society, where you put
the
out
Wrightson Society.
a little thing comes out every quarter, and it's just people talking about him, not even artists, just people, and showing a piece and someone commenting on a piece. That would be huge. I would sign up for that in 2 seconds.
About to say, I think you might be onto something there.
Yeah,
that is a really nice ring to it too. The Wrightson Society.
I've thought about it since he passed, that there should be something like a quarterly little fanzine magazine, because he came from fanzines, and just the Wrightson Quarterly, and just discussions of his work, discussions of each issue, discussions of a panel. I did that recently. I just talked about 2 panels that turned me around.
Wow.
And they were so powerful. They were so powerful. And they weren't the stuff that it should have been. It was just that made me feel something.
Right.
And even though I was a kid and couldn't really articulate it, it made me feel it to stick around. And emotion is far more powerful. You don't have to be correct about anything. You can make a lot of mistakes. You can blow it. You can do whatever. But if something's created with emotion, you don't even have to go to college to learn any of this. If you can create with emotion and receive emotion, that's all it takes. It's an intangible. And for a guy to hone that and not lose it, not let the technical take over the emotion of it, that's so rare. I mean, I fight that all the time. I go, I see how things are done now and they're fine, but they don't strike me. They don't make me stay. I can appreciate it in the present, in that moment, but it doesn't do that thing the way Wrightson would, and others of that time. And I think it's because there's a reason. And I always try to say, is it nostalgia? Is it no? These guys do not reference every single thing. Gene Colan used his head. John Buscema used it's all their imagination. Kirby. You name them from that time. It's all their imagination. So when you read those books from that time, you are transported because it's these guys' singular imagination.
Yeah.
Wrightson was able to do something within genre that went outside of it, but it's the same thing with him. And it's why we respond so much. And I always feel, and maybe it's true of music or in film and other things where, musicians get together, they hammer it out, they go play it. There's no technology. It's just them and their ability. And that stuff lasts forever.
Yeah.
Now it's, 73 producers and they're all, and it's of its time. It's so of its time. Wrightson was a guy alone with a crow quill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he did more than anyone with all the programs and Photoshops and references and all that. It's him and a crow quill.
Yeah. When I heard that he used a crow quill, I was absolutely flabbergasted.
I have not changed my, I'll try to work with different tools, but I always work with those things too. The reason is, and it's emotion. that as he presses with it, there's life in that crow quill.
Mm-hmm.
Thin to thick.
Oh, man.
In fact, he told me at one point he had to change some of it. It's an interesting thing he said. He says, I had to change it because I got so good at it, so familiar at it, that from mind to hand, and you'd think this isn't right, but from mind to hand, it was too smooth. It was too slick. It was too, I didn't have that point where I had to stop and consider what I was doing and make those
interesting.
decisions. Yeah. So he said, so I had to get different tools that I was not comfortable with, that I wasn't familiar with, and it would slow me down.
I mean, how many people would look at it like that's amazing, because it just shows such a different level, such a different approach.
It made me do that. It made me stop and think he's right. Rather than try to become a master of it, which he had, is you had to be careful of that mastery, because it started to make you not think.
Wow.
And he was a thinker. So he wanted to slow it down so the organics would stay, so the lighting would stay, he wouldn't just be, oh, that's a beautiful line, I'm pulling a great line, I'm pushing a great line. It was like, no, the thing I'm doing is coming to life. And genius.
Wow.
Genius to think like that.
Yeah. And
so that always stayed with me. That was something that really stayed with me.
Well, I mean, I definitely feel like I see in your work, like your work is definitely Kelley Jones. Like when I read Daphne Byrne, like I feel like I walk into it and I can tell it's your imagination.
Right.
And it's the same, in everything, whether it's Sandman or Hammer or Deadman or Daphne Byrne or whatever. It's you. And
well, what you do, what long ago when I started at Marvel, they had it's long gone now, but what they used to do is teach you things. And they didn't just teach you how to do it. I had no clue. I was an inker, and they had said, you're now going to be a penciler. And I said, I've drawn like 11 pages in my life, basically to ink to show you guys. I storytell all these components I don't have because I didn't draw. Now, as a film guy, so I understood the terms. I had studied film, so I understood it. And so I came from an influence that was different than that. Now, I loved Wrightson and I love comics, but I didn't study to be a comic book artist. Where do you go? And drawing things, I wanted to draw subjects, not stories. And I was a movie and television guy. I loved that. So Marvel would say, the hard stuff like draw a page a day, no matter what, just do a page a day. On that page, draw one panel that's really exceptional. Don't worry about the others. If you can do that, that's 22 really good panels in an issue. And that's hard to do. Not 22 great pages, 22 great panels. Mm-hmm. If you can do that, you're never going to, they would say things like that. And that made it easier than you obsessing on every little thing. Mm-hmm. So for me, the only way I could stand out, because I knew I'd never be a draftsman like a Neil Adams or a John Byrne or a Jack. I'd never be a draftsman. I wasn't concerned with the things that comic books said you had to be. I wasn't concerned with perfect 3-point perspective because they're so small, I'll just eyeball it. I mean, I didn't learn that stuff. But I knew film, which said foreground, midground, background. Mm-hmm. That I could do. That's how I thought. So I would come with a different point of view to comics than how did Alex Raymond draw or how well did Alex Toth do it. I wasn't concerned with that. And and it's not that I didn't care. It's just, I was more of, well, how would Orson Welles do this? Or how would Mario Bava do this? Or how would Hitchcock do it? Because I had been studying film so much and taking classes in it and whatnot. So when it came to me, Marvel used to say a great thing. You have to hear someone's comment on you that can go either way. And I had an editor tell me this, and I didn't understand what that meant. He says, if they say they know it's you, that could be bad too. Oh. Well, that sucks. That's you, right? It's like that. But the bigger picture is they know it's you. Okay. And
Yeah.
if you're at this point and you're producing art, there's plenty of people who are going to like what you do.
Right.
But always make them have an opinion. And the only way to really do that is you have to have the ideas. And now I look back on the reason they hired me to be a penciler when I'd only done 11 pages was on those pages was a lot of imagination.
What
There was a lot of stuff
was it Micronauts 50, 59?
Something like that. I remember I was hired to ink it over the incredible Butch Guys. And when he quit, I thought my career was over. I thought it was done. I didn't, I was ready to go back and just keep doing what I was doing. And and because at that point I figured, or I would have to try out again on a different artist, different penciler. And they had looked at other pencilers, and I don't know who, but they said, oh, you'd know them, but we prefer you. And I said, only inked a handful of books. And they said, and it was only until later I realized that the stuff they had seen had a lot of imagination. There was a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff they hadn't seen. My editor then, Ralph Macchio, had said later, he says, I just didn't see anything like this from other people. And I can't really say it was great. I can say, though, it was original.
It's great, too. I had never seen it before. I actually looked it up earlier online. Micronauts was something that kind of predated me.
Well, they can't reprint them because of the rights issues.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You
It
either
was a
see it
toy
or that's
first.
it. Yeah.
But I was absolutely blown away. Just, I think it was the third page of issue 59 where it's this like exterior of I guess it's a space station. I'm not that familiar with the story or the characters, but I mean, I was looking at this like, holy shit, this is the first book that he drew.
I had worked with, the writer was Peter Gillis, who was a science fiction author. So he had these big ideas, and I just tried to keep up. I mean,
it's beautifully executed.
Well, thank you.
Jesus,
it's one of those things that I never, it was a learn on the go thing. You were learning as I went. I had to learn pacing. I had to learn how to tell stories, how to be quiet, how to be loud, close up, pull back, all these things I'm learning on the go. And so I knew what I knew from my love of books, comics, but I didn't invest myself the way a lot of my other artist friends do, where they can take something apart and tell you all about it. And I still can't do that. I just can tell you how I felt when I read it.
Right.
And I'm more of an intuitive guy, probably because I'm okay. My approach to it probably is this. If you buy a Monopoly board game, most people will sit down and read the rules of how to play Monopoly. I'm the one who goes, that's like school. Let's just roll dice and see what we get. I just want to get to the rolling dice and moving my little race car around.
Right.
I'll figure it out as I go. I live every day in dread of boredom. Not I don't need a job, not any of that, boredom. So when I get a story, it's what can I do with it to make it interesting for me that day, that page, what is it? If something becomes boring, I can't fake that. I can draw anything, but if I'm given something boring, I'm going to change it. I'm going to do something with it. And that doesn't mean give me stuff I want to draw. It means make me feel something.
Right.
I'm the first audience after the editor, I guess. I'm the first audience. I want to feel something. Now, that doesn't mean like if something comes that isn't up my cup of tea, I'll just throw in the towel. Nope. I'll work with them as best I can and try to at least use that experience. But I never come to them and say I'm a master of comic book technology and comic book expertise or anything. I'm not. But I know intuitively what makes it interesting. And what I wanted to do is not be tied to a date, tied to a period of time. I just want to be tied to myself. And there can be earlier forms of what I do, later form, whatever, but that is still there. That drawing someone in, it will still be there. I was always very glad when I did Batman that recently, and it's not a for your ego or something, but I was very glad when DC had let me know that they'd chosen how I did him that look for the 90s. They had chosen the 40s and the 50s, 60s. Mm-hmm. Neil Adams had taken me aside once and said, your version of Batman in that when you did it is wonderful. He really liked it. And he had told me that, he was of his time, that he knew that he was the look and whatever, but he had extended that to me. Well, that was nice. He said that, and I thanked him very much. But when DC formally said that we see your version as the look of it, that was very touching, and I was very, very honored by that. But I was ultimately, again, thankful. It goes back to that Wrightson thing, that it came from just personal ideas. It didn't come from, I was a great draftsman and took detailed anatomy and knew all the ins and outs of it. It wasn't. It was this thing of this kid who's alone in a room, drawing a picture, not wanting to be bored that day. So trying to think of something to make it exciting for myself and hopefully extend that to other people, extend that philosophy of who I thought this character was, not draw him cool, but draw his as a philosophy on paper, as I'd seen done with Swamp Thing, as I'd seen done by with Deadman, I got that. And with Sandman, I got that. And it worked in those times. Because I made those characters like if I had invented them, not denigrating the people who did. It's just, I can't do what they do. And I would have other artists notice this who were much better at articulating that point. Because I would just say this and then they would tell me, no, they could see these things because they could see the nuts and bolts, but they also could see the ideas, and they realized that's the hard part. Is where do the idea, for a writer, where do the ideas come from? The prose is one thing, it's the writing. And when put into a corner, I always, about, learning this stuff, I was always reminded of a great interview Ray Bradbury had given. And that he didn't learn from writing courses and professors, and he didn't learn a thing from them. He said he learned from reading Edgar Rice Burroughs and reading Buck Rogers comic strips in the 30s. That's where he learned to write.
Wow.
And he said, I didn't, and then reading other great writers, not how did you write? He read Thomas Wolfe, and you can see the legacy of Wolfe to him. If you read Wolfe, it's that lyrical, beautiful poet. If Wolfe wrote science fiction, horror, whatever, you'd get Ray Bradbury.
Ray Bradbury.
But Ray Bradbury didn't sit there and take classes and he just wrote. And he said this thing, it's intuition and emotion. And if you can't get that across, you're never going to be good. Doesn't matter how many degrees you get.
Right.
And there's a power in that. It's frightening because what you'll think is, well, if I learn this, everyone will like it. If I learn the equations of anatomy, perspective, all these things, people will like it. It doesn't work that way. If it works on, if something inside you can get to paper, get through the editing, get through the printer, get through everything to that person alone in the room like you were, that's the trick. That's a lot harder too, by the way. So I was very fortunate that the period that I was, and it happens when you're at that age, that you have all this energy and all this stuff that wants to come out. If you do it to impress others, I don't think it works as well. If you do it for yourself, it does. You have to risk being fired. You have to risk being ridiculed, put down,
right.
People not liking it. You have to. It's okay. If someone doesn't like your work, or if someone says you're fired, whatever, that's okay. As long as you're doing what you thought. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that artsy fartsy, but it's the truth. If you believe in it, it will find its way. And there's much more energy and power behind it. If you listen to people who write great reviews, be afraid of that more than the ones who write the negative, because that'll make you slow. That's the same as Wrightson's getting too good with the pen.
Yeah.
You have to be very wary of those. The ones who are negative tend to nail it that what you're doing that's right, though they may not like it. They'll nail what's right because their dislike of it, they are deconstructing you and saying, here it is. If someone just says, I don't like it and doesn't say it, I don't care. Who cares? But if they say, I don't like it because I don't understand the cape, or I don't like it because Dead Man's too skinny or whatever, fine. And then they'll go into details. Those are the decisions I made that worked. They're noticing it.
Right.
And I don't do it for shtick. I do it to convey something, an emotion, an atmosphere, a storytelling point. So I'm okay with those guys. They're cool. They're fine. I want to be stereotyped. That's what you work for. A stereotype is fine because what it means is, in a personal sense, you're trying to communicate to someone through it's not words, it's an odd language. So if they say, well, you're the horror guy or you're the guy with the weird cape guy, okay. That's okay. Because once you sit down with it, like I did with Wrightson, once you sit down with it, he's the monster guy. They're beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So at that point it was fine. When Dead Man came out and it did what it did, I didn't hear Kelley's a genius artist. Like, why didn't look at this guy? So it's creepy. He's skeleton. And if people didn't like it because he was a skeleton, that's okay, because they really wouldn't have liked it if I drew like Neil.
Mm-hmm.
Then they'd have hated it. I mean, outright hated it. And to have Adams compliment both those things with me was better than any award you get. To have Wrightson ask me to help him towards the end was better than any award, because these are guys who've been through the battles. They know what it's like to put it on the line. They know what it's like when you're going to do something that might be contrary to whatever the tastes are. It's easy to do this if all you think is, I'm happy to have a job. It becomes so much more satisfying if you put your own imprint on something that makes people go, even if they don't. I mean, the best thing an artist can ever hear, a writer or anyone, is, I didn't like it and now I can't see it any other way, or I didn't like it and now I do like it. I met with that. I've earned that dislike to like. If they like it, that's great, but I've earned it if someone doesn't, because I'm not stupid. I look at how books are done. But I always think if there's 20 books and I do one, 19 are pretty much this way, and then there's me.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't like it, there's 19 others.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. But for the people who stick around in this, and for the people who love this, and they go on and on and on, when they finally get out of it, they get rid of the other 19 and always keep mine. And I've found that over and over and over. And it can be editors and other artists. But I've been very fortunate, knock on wood, that I always had a popular support for this. And I don't understand that either. I mean, I don't. I look at it. I mean, time is weird that way. I'll go back and look and I'll go, oh my God. Or they'll release something where something I did is in with everybody else. And I go, whoa, what is that? Even I do. That is so different. So to have had any measure of success through that period, I owe to Professor Wrightson.
That's awesome.
Because he was the guy to say, steer your own star. And he didn't say that to me then. He did it.
Right. Mm-hmm. He was the example that
he did
you followed.
It. There was always whatever comics is going on, and then Bernie. And when John Byrne said his thing about who's better than me and everyone gets on him, he was saying that at the same time those incredible Wrightson plates were coming out. So as good as the X-Men were with Terry Austin, those Wrightson things were a quantum level better.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow. I loved, just on a personal note, I loved hearing you say everything that you just said. I mean, you know, everything today, but everything that you just said, because that idea of, you know, you do it for yourself, and, you know, I'm releasing a new novel next week, and I'm a little bit hesitant about it because I feel like it's my favorite thing I've written, but it's so weird. And I just feel like I want people to
get it, but I don't know that they will. And there's the part of me, and that you've just reaffirmed, this little kernel, this little like hearth inside that's like, just chill out, man. You did it for you.
Yeah.
Who fucking cares? You did it for you, and it is exactly what I wanted to do. So I thank you.
No, what it is do you want people to like your work? Certainly. Do you want people to? Yes, you do. Ultimately, though, how do you want them to come to that conclusion? By doing what somebody else tells you, or whatever the current conventions are, or your own heart.
Right.
And understand that where someone may not like it initially, art is funny this way. It lasts over time.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come to discover it. I have had numerous people come to me, and there's nothing more gratifying than that. It's weird.
Vertigo was beaten to death by critics when it came out, and it's clearly like one of the greatest movies ever made, and everybody knows it now. You know,
I always above where I work in my studio, I have a poster I got on the wall of Stanley Kubrick. And it's just Stanley, and I can look around. He's just looking at you like this. And it's from an interview where he said, you either care or you don't. But everything virtually Kubrick did when he started being free, they didn't like it. And it always is this movement towards it being classic. To where you go, everything the guy made was great. I remember seeing The Shining in the theater, and it knocked me out because people wanted the book,
right?
But he identified the flaws in the book, and he removed the pulp conventions of it and put in the literary conventions of it. Totally. And now it's considered the top 3 greatest horror films ever made. You can go back to it every time and learn something new. To him, the difficult thing was a strong woman, as King wrote it, would not put up with a guy like this. So he put an arc in there from a weak woman to a strong woman. Mm-hmm. And her arc is fascinating.
Yeah, totally.
The house, he had The Shining. He's the one with The Shining. But his value is he doesn't know it and believe in it because he's been polluted by human thinking that's crazy. It's not the boy. The boy's dangerous because he can identify it and he doesn't have an adult's view. None of that's in the book. That's Kubrick. So it becomes literary. The Shining becomes a literary thing. But boy, when that came out, why doesn't the hedges grow, jump, and grab you? He turned him into the Minotaur, looking into the maze.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You see this genius at work who took something that he loved the book, but he made it literary. He elevated it. It can't be, but he did this over and over. Barry Lyndon, he worked in natural light, not studio light. Now everybody does it. It's easy. But he did the pacing of the time. Now it's just a pleasure to go through these things. The abuse he took for 2001, but he did it. He pulled. Look, they talk about canceling now and whatever. He can't. He was with Clockwork Orange, which is still. You look at it and you just go, it is as tour de force as it gets.
Yeah.
And he speaks clearly and directly to you.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. So when you see someone like that, when you're creating, it isn't like you have to go out and do Kubrick. I don't do that. But I always look and say, you either care or you don't. And that means putting all your effort into it and what is in your heart. And that's the only way artists make it. And we may not make it at the time. We may not make it at the immediate moment of something coming out. If there's tragedy in that, it's Lovecraft didn't realize what an influence he was.
Oh, I think of that all the time. He'll never know.
He'll never know. But that will happen with certain people. You just go, they were so far ahead of their time.
Yeah.
And And with Stanley Kubrick wasn't around going, I'm in modes of alienation. He just wanted to make a picture that was interesting to himself, the way he did. And it all comes back to what we're talking about with Wrightson. That's what he was doing. It's all the same. It's what's happened, my personal experience with that. Being yourself and doing something differently doesn't mean you're untrained. It doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing. It doesn't mean you're lesser than anyone else. It doesn't mean that. It means you're yourself. And that's difficult in any society at any time in the history of the world. It doesn't mean you're a victim. It doesn't mean it means that if anything, you feel your emotions stronger than most people and you're willing to show it. That's what it means. So to put it in paper, whether you write it or draw it, you're committing yourself to that ideal and to your personal feelings, where most people keep it hidden. Most people don't say anything. Frank Herbert's Dune was trashed when it came out as a book. He couldn't even get a publisher. He had to go to an auto repair book company. And that's the only book they ever published that wasn't how to fix your Camaro.
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
So it's Chilton. Chilton is.
Yeah, I know Chilton.
Okay. The only thing they ever published was Dune.
I didn't realize that. Oh, my God.
And if there's a book that's the greatest science fiction novel ever written, easily hands down Dune. They can't stop remaking it.
Yeah.
Okay. It's such a personal book. It's all of his philosophies. There's no ray guns and all that stuff. That it's guys sitting around in a desert, and it gets big, and it's all philosophical. It's all political. It's all the Wars of the Roses, but in 10,000 years from now. It's Shakespearean. So, but it's all personal. It's from his gut. It's something that came from him while he was a journalist in Oregon. And that's the star we steer by is, okay, I'm going to say something. People are going to let me have it. I completely reconcile myself to trivial things like long ears on Batman or a skinny dead man because there's a thinking behind it.
Right.
They don't need to know the thinking. The people who get into it, then they'll get it. Batman has these weird ears and weird cape because he's a shadow. He's not a guy who stands there next to Superman doing things in Justice League. He's a shadow in an alley. He's a dark thing in the corner of your room saying, never do that again. I'm watching you. To us.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's what he is. He's not this other thing. Dead Man is skeletal because he's emotionally decomposing. He's in our world, but unable to touch. He's unable to connect. He's lonely. And so it physically manifests in him his emotional state. If he got happy, I'd draw him normal, but he's not.
Right. So
they don't have to know that. But that's my working position on both those characters.
And it comes through, even if only intuitively, like the Batman thing. I never knew why you did that.
Yeah.
But it makes perfect sense to hear you say that. It's like, oh my God.
Because I don't know how to do him the other way. I wouldn't relate on putting on a cape and stopping crying.
Right.
I know how to be scared. I know what would scare me. I'm in the hall of my house, walking down. It's at night. There's no lights on. He's standing there. I'm on the phone, making plans to do evil things. He's in the corner the whole time. And after I hang up, he says, I'm on to you. Oh my God. And I don't look at him and say, oh, look at his belt and his shoelaces and details. There's this frickin' thing there.
Wow.
And his shadow, his shape, that's what he does it for. To me, that's what he does it for. You never forget it. You don't want that to come back. That's the last time you'll see him. And off he goes. And I won't do it again. The crazies, they do it again. That's why they're locked up.
Right.
But there's only a handful of them. The rest of us, we never do it again. And you have to, when you're going to do it, how do you do this differently? Or how do you bring something fresh to something, to me, that would have been done 60 years, 70 years at that point? That's the only thing I could think of was, well, he's fear. And that's actually a better power than running really fast or be an Aquaman. It's a better power.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
Yeah, because that means I'm the one giving him that over me. I, as his victim, am giving him that power. No one gives the Flash the power. No one gives Superman. I'm giving him that power over me. It's the fear of the unknown with him and what he'll bring down on me.
Well, and that is the essence of the character too, right? So like whenever he gets
a
too
lot of people miss the
superhero-y,
mark on that. A lot of people miss the mark on it. And the reason they do is they want him to be cool.
Yeah.
They don't want him to be terrifying. Terrifying is much harder to get on paper. And so
you do it.
Well, thank you. It comes from this other place I came from. But also with it comes the fact that I did that for myself. I don't mean that in a noble sense, like, yes, I stood alone on the battlements fighting off everything. It was like, I'm alone in a room. What do I do to make it cool? Right. For me, interesting for me, not boring for me, frightening for me. And I can't know how to be the other thing. I don't know how to be a hero. I don't know how to do that. And I don't draw from how it should look. I draw from how it should feel to read it. And no one's going to think about the drawing to me. I didn't. I always thought of the impact of a book and telling other people about this book. Mm-hmm. That's how it works for me. So if you're putting out something that's different, unique, and whatever, that's the right course to go. That's the right map to follow. I don't know how successful those things are initially, but who cares? Because if it's a
success to you,
and commercially you want it to be successful. Don't get me wrong, but your best chance at successful is being you.
Right.
There's tons of the other guys. And that's what I thought when I first got Batman. There's tons of the other guys. When I did Deadman, it's frankly just Neil I had to deal with. But there's tons of other guys who've been masterful at it, fabulous at it. I'm not going in there thinking I'm going to be better, and I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. But what I thought was, I'll act like I invented Batman.
Mm-hmm. Like you just have to make it your own.
Yes, and take the chances. I expected every month, though, and I mean this. I used to tell my editors this. I told Danny O'Neill, I expected every month to be fired. And them to pull the contract.
And instead they chose you as your Batman as the 90s representation of the character.
Now, because time has passed and the people making that decision weren't there then. They just looked at everything and how they felt. Mm-hmm. DC recently did a thing a few years ago. I don't know, they put out several volumes of the greatest Batman story with this character, whatever. I don't know. They put out 8 or 9 of them. I'm in like 8 of the 9 or 7 of the 8. And I had the people making those decisions weren't there then. It doesn't mean they're the great. It's just the ones that made the impact. And God, I didn't think that at the time. I was just trying to get through the day. I was trying to make a deadline and get through the day. I was trying to be that thing that I felt would offer someone a choice when they went to the stands. And I didn't think of myself as anything other than trying to keep up with all the other guys who did know how to do this. I was always the runt of the litter. And I don't mean it's a victim or I feel bad or whatever. I was the runt of the litter. They all knew this stuff. I would sit and talk to these guys. Man, they knew their stuff. And I had nothing to contribute. I remember going to a Batman conference and I basically didn't say anything because everyone there, artists, writers, they all knew their stuff. And I went, I know nothing. I just know how I felt when I read it. So I would just go, well, this part was neat that this guy did, and that was cool. I didn't have but these guys knew technically how to do it, how to break it down, how to whatever. And I didn't. And where I am grateful is I didn't go home and try to learn. I just said, well, I got this far this way. I got to stick with this now.
Mm-hmm.
And all I knew was I was getting a good reaction from readers. And I would hear from other peers saying, hey, this is pretty cool. This is pretty good. They didn't go into great detail and deconstruct me. Wrightson did that. But that was artist to artist. But I wasn't being told I was lacking something. So even though I knew I was lacking something, I was making up for it in a different way. Mm-hmm. I was making up for it in something intuitive that I couldn't even put words to. It's only through time and distance do you see that. And I knew what I wanted. I knew what I was going for. I was big on symbolism in my books. So even when I go back, I can see that there's a lot of symbolism in what I do. There's a lot of expressionism in what I do. And then there's a lot of comic book comics that I do. But I was mixing all together from my film background. I wanted to play it louder because I enjoyed the performances, for example, in a Stanley Kubrick film. They're loud. Mm-hmm. They're over the top, but they connect with me. David Lynch is a big influence on me as well because
me too.
It's so personal and his people are over the top. And they make sense to me because the great line by Kubrick was, realism is good, but imagination is better. Reality, he had told Jack Nicholson that whereas others photograph reality, he likes to take the photograph of that photograph.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that's it, because it highlights that feeling, that emotion. I remember I saw Eyes Wide Shut, and what struck me about Eyes Wide Shut is a lot of my favorite people, Lynch is one, whatever, they all go back to this film noir thing. And Eyes Wide Shut is a noir. Mm-hmm. It's the last, along with Lynch, the last great noir directors were Kubrick and Lynch. And what was remarkable about it was his meditation on marriage. You're with this person, you've been through it all. I won't say it but I don't want to ruin it for anyone. The last line of that movie is the best line in a movie. When it's, how do you deal with all this stuff? And he said, interestingly, that he wanted to make this movie because he had been married for a very long time and raised his family. And he just knew so many people that had in and out of relationships and their marriages were over and whatever. And so it's really about this guy's weird dream, weird experience, whatever, dealing with his marriage. Mm-hmm. And really think about his marriage and what marriage means and what that commitment means. It's brilliant. And I remember coming out of that, and like I said, I don't want to ruin it. Anyone who's not seen it, when you get to that last line, it is the best solution to marriage. I've never heard it put better.
That movie also, I think, is not. It's also terrifying. It has one of the most terrifying scenes in it. I always rank it up there.
I do too, and I think what makes it great is it's very relatable. It's a very human thing. It's a very emotional story, and it's people trying to avoid those things, being forced to deal with those things. And it's actually, it ends, and you wouldn't think this from a Stanley Kubrick film. It's a thing saying, hey, marriage is pretty fucking good. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing. So work on it. Mm-hmm. You know, this selfishness, he removed himself from it. I think the same thing with Lynch. There's this wonderful quality in his films that is almost an aw shucks thing with this incredible Salvador Dali mentality going on.
Yeah. And the over the top. Even, I've thought recently, because recently I rewatched both Blue Velvet and Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
And you take the cowboy and Frank Booth, and at first they seem like total opposites. And then you realize the cowboy is more terrifying than Frank Booth because he doesn't need to raise his voice.
Yeah.
I mean,
he leans closer to what I love in Mulholland. He leans closer and speaks softly, and he means everything he says.
Yeah.
Far worse than a guy, but everything with Lynch, and there's a thing they both do, and I always tell people I work with, and I do it myself. Kubrick once said he didn't care about the story as it was. I mean, he needed the story to love, but he didn't care about the story this way, the way we think. What made him love a story was in a film, he needed 6 or 7 great scenes. He'll stitch them together however he can do it. Lynch said he has several ideas in his head.
Yeah.
And somehow I got to weave something to connect it all up. Neither of them were afraid of ambiguity. And that's my thing. I put a lot of ambiguity in whatever I draw. And I love that other people can fill that in or extrapolate or decide what that is that makes them enjoy the piece or experience the piece. I don't want, and here's every reason why something happened. You can do that in a master's hands, you can do it. I think the end of Psycho, my favorite scene actually is a guy explaining what happened, because it becomes creepy, because then they end with the crazy person who's not there anymore. That works. That's the exception to that rule. So break a rule. With Kubrick or with Lynch, if you look at them, never do you see them explain their work.
No.
Never, ever. How many people, I mean, I sit there and watch 2001, and I find this thing that keeps happening in 2001 that is so basic and so normal and so regular and so boring, but it tells you that we don't belong in space, and that's eating. Right. There's always eating going on.
Yeah.
Starts with the primitive humanoid creatures eating grubs and bits, and then they eat meat. Then we go into space, and he's talking about going to get breakfast and then drinking the little things on the way to the moon. And then when they're going to see the monolith, they're talking about how good they're getting at ham sandwiches and chicken sandwiches. And then they go and talk about birthday cake. Oh, wish you could have some birthday cake. And then they eat their food while watching themselves interviewed. And he ends with him knocking a glass over while he's eating. There's constantly this thing of eating, which tells you how tied we are to the earth.
Yeah.
And that we're not meant to be out there yet. That we're too earthly to be out there experiencing this great philosophy. If you're still eating, you're not able to comprehend the mysteries of the universe. Wow. That's a brilliant thing. If you're still 3 guys on the mission have to be kept asleep to preserve your food. It's a genius thing. He does it subtly. It's just there. Yeah.
It's there for you to the relationship to kind of decode that. It's like I've been thinking about Twin Peaks since I saw it as a kid.
Yes.
It changed my life and the way I thought about music or genre or stories or whatever. I mean, literally from the day, I just happened to catch the pilot when it aired as a Sunday night movie. As a freshman in high school, I've been thinking and talking and reading about it ever since. I'm 45.
I think that one of the great crimes in film is all the reviewers not liking Firewalk with me, which I think is an incredible film.
Yep.
As terrifying a horror film, if you want to put it that way.
Jesus Christ, yeah.
I have never seen a film deal with sexual abuse.
Not like that.
Is right on the money.
Yeah. Oh my
dead
God.
On. Way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
I don't know where Lynch, if that's his own personal view on it or if he studied, I don't know. But it's a perfect complement to the first go around. I love everything he's done with it because never does he give you an easy thing.
Mm-mm.
He absolutely respects you. I think Inland Empire is the same thing. There's this this like you watch it and it works as a film noir, as a mystery, as a whatever, just as a cinematic experience. But it also works on a different level where it stays with you forever. And you think about it. I could be totally wrong, but the thing with the eating in 2001, I didn't get the first time I saw it. It was over repeated viewings.
Yeah, of course.
Going back to this, going, boy, this is a big deal. Everywhere they go, it's about, think about it. We can't just go traverse the universe. You got to bring some sandwiches. You know? And he's right.
He's totally right.
He's right.
I can't wait to rewatch 2001.
Yeah,
God, it's been a while.
It is. And his marriage of music to movies had never been done like that.
Oh my God, yeah.
And I don't even know how to describe it. It isn't again, it's a very difficult film to describe what kind of a movie it is.
Because it's well, like you said before, Kubrickian, right? Like there's like certain artists like, Lynchian, Kubrickian, Cronenbergian, I mean,
Wellesian. Yes.
Yeah, Wellesian. There's a reason why that is, because there's no other way to describe it. And some people are like, oh, that's pretentious. It's like,
and the
no,
amount
it's not.
of abuse, and so that's why I tend to spin it in a good way. The amount of abuse these guys took is a good thing. If you get abuse, you're doing something right.
Yeah. Oh man. Wow.
You have to. All the great ones, that happened to them. And Michelangelo, he didn't do a romantic David the way everyone else did. He did the moment to fight David, which was utterly brand new in art. We just look at David and we go, hey, David, it's a great sculpture, but not at the time. At the time, there's all these sensitive Davids and nice Davids. David's decision to fling that rock and kill a guy from shepherd to warrior is captured in that moment. Utterly unique. No one had thought of it. No one did it.
Wow.
And that's what, us lesser beings try to
right.
It's why he's the man, right? Shakespeare, Michelangelo, and then all of us trying to catch up. You get to film, then you can say, well, Kubrick or Lynch, the rest of us trying to catch up. What kind of movie would Shakespeare have written if he knew? What kind of film would Michelangelo direct if he could? You saw these guys invent things.
Yeah.
And be able to deal with, everyone talks about the politics now in creation. I always subscribe to Lynch's freedom first, freedom, freedom, freedom. But look at the greatness. Shakespeare had to deal with the Tudor dynasty that was as political and biased, and they wanted propaganda, yet he created this genius work that survived that whole thing. The same with Michelangelo. You're dealing with Italian politics of 500 years ago, which is, stab you, poison you.
Right.
and he created things that transcended and invented and were brand new. They just weren't good. They were brand new. And he got in a fist fight with Da Vinci. That's awesome. So
really? I didn't know.
Oh yeah, it was over the stone for David, and it was everyone wanted a piece of it, and they were all going to make it smaller or do this thing, and then he said, "I'm going to make it big," and the moment of decision, one to another, transitional. But none of these people, even at the time, they didn't go around until after he was dead did they say Shakespeare was the greatest. Michelangelo had artists loving on him, but they loved Raphael just as much, probably more. He was kinder. There wasn't this challenge to the viewer that Michelangelo did. So there's always that thing. And so you're always seeking it. The point is to offend, but challenge and to whatever. Right. All the people we're talking about did this. But they did it from themselves, not in order to simply do that, but in order to express something they thought was missing or something they hadn't seen. And so we come all the way down to what we're talking about here with Wrightson. That's what I always felt he was doing before I even could articulate it. Later on, when I became aware and more experienced in art in general, the spell he cast worked on me the way these guys cast their spells, and it worked. So they're rare, but they're there, that it does happen. And the only chance we have is to try to be, you write a book that is a book you would want to read.
Right.
That's it.
Kelley, I cannot. So I'm going to end this now because I have to. But I cannot thank you. And so first of all, you have outlined a lineage that goes from Michelangelo to Bernie Wrightson, and I mean, I just think that it wasn't flippant or embellished. It's
not
you
over,
walked us.
Yes, it's not overly. It comes from 40 some odd years of going through this.
Yes, of living with it. And
yes, and you equate that, okay, when you're a kid, your mom makes something good, you smell it, years later you smell it, and you're right back to that place, right? It's some primitive part of our brain. The same thing with art. The reaction I had to something I loved that was in a comic book happened later with something when I read one of Shakespeare's history plays or saw David, where you just see it. That same thing happens. This primitive part of my brain responded the same.
Okay, so that was the end of our Kelley Jones interview. I want to thank Mr. Jones again for being on. I want to thank Chris Saunders, my co-host, for setting this up. You'll notice at the end we had a little bit of a technical difficulty with Zoom, so it kind of cuts off abruptly. And we just want to reiterate to Mr. Jones that we absolutely adore him and thank him for his time. And thank you guys and gals for listening. This has been A Most Horrible Library, and we'll be back to open the door to horror sooner than you think.